Hand over your keycard, Vance. As of 9 a.m., your employment with Apex Intermodal is terminated for insubordination. Trevor Vance's voice cut through the glass-walled conference room like a dull razor. He pushed a one-page severance release across the mahogany table, a laughable offer offering 2 weeks of pay in exchange for surrendering all intellectual property rights. Across the table, 34-year-old Trevor adjusted his tailored Italian suit jacket, a smug grin playing on his lips. Beside him, 3 armed private security guards shifted uncomfortably. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fists. I simply signed the termination notice, slid the severance release back unsigned, stood up, and tapped my watch. You have exactly 48 hours before the ocean freight pipeline freezes, Trevor. Good luck. I walked out into the crisp morning air, leaving behind 22 years of dedication, but holding the master key to a $120 million supply chain empire. To understand how a mid-tier regional logistics firm found itself perched on the brink of total operational collapse, you have to go back to 2004. I was 30 years old when I joined Apex Intermodal Logistics as a mid-level drayage coordinator. Back then, the company operated out of a drafty warehouse office near the port of Los Angeles, handling roughly 50 container moves a week. The founder, George Vance, was an old-school freight man who understood the fundamental truth of international shipping. Freight doesn't move on promises. It moves on flawless documentation, regulatory compliance, and airtight carrier relationships. Over the next 2 decades, I poured my life into building Apex's intermodal infrastructure. I worked 16-hour days, mastering the labyrinthine regulations of the Federal Maritime Commission, Customs and Border Protection, and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. By 2018, I had risen to Chief Logistics Director, overseeing an operation that moved over 45,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, annually across the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland. My crown jewel, however, was PortTrack 4.0. In 2012, recognizing that legacy freight management systems were painfully slow and prone to human error, I personally designed, developed, and copyrighted a proprietary electronic data interchange routing engine. PortTrack was not owned by Apex. It was registered under my personal holding company, Miller Logistics Tech LLC, and leased to Apex under an exclusive revocable licensing agreement for a nominal fee of $1 per year, alongside my employment contract. PortTrack was the central nervous system of Apex. It automatically ingested vessel stowage plans from major ocean carriers like Maersk, MSC, and COSCO. It cross-referenced container serial numbers against Federal Maritime Commission Ocean Transportation Intermediary licenses, automatically booked port terminal appointments, generated automated hazmat manifests, and dispatched drayage trucks in real time. Without PortTrack, Apex's dispatchers were completely blind, reduced to manually calling terminal operators and manually filing customs entries, a process that took hours per container instead of milliseconds. Furthermore, because Apex lacked the corporate longevity required by federal regulators, in its early days, the company operated its ocean freight forwarding operations under my personal FMC Ocean Transportation Intermediary License and Custom Bond. Under Clause 14B of our corporate operating agreement, my personal OTI license and the PortTrack software license were tied directly to my active employment status as Chief Logistics Director. If my employment was terminated without cause, or if I resigned due to a material breach of contract, both licenses reverted immediately to my sole control, with a mandatory 48-hour revocation notice period. For 20 years, George Vance and I ran Apex with mutual respect. The company grew into a powerhouse, generating over $120 million in annual intermodal freight revenue. But in early 2025, 64-year-old George suffered a mild stroke and stepped back into an advisory role as chairman. Into the operational vacuum stepped his 34-year-old son, Trevor Vance. Trevor held an MBA from a prestigious business school, possessed zero operational freight experience, and viewed logistics not as a delicate web of legal compliance, but as a playground for quick cost-cutting and corporate restructuring. Trevor arrived at Apex with a team of 30-something management consultants who spoke in corporate jargon like margin optimization, frictionless synergy, and headcount rationalization. From day one, Trevor saw me as an obstacle. I was 52 years old, earned a base salary of $240,000 a year, and held an accrued equity performance bonus of $420,000 slated for payout at the end of the fiscal quarter. To Trevor's spreadsheet-driven mind, my salary and bonus represented an unacceptable drain on EBITDA, especially since he was quietly courting a private equity firm, Sterling Capital Partners, for a $300 million buyout. In October 2025, Trevor initiated his strategy. He bypassed my office and began mandating operational changes that violated federal maritime standards. He ordered dispatchers to double-stack overweight containers without state permits, instructed customs clerks to under-declare freight values on imported electronics to skirt tariff duties, and attempted to push hazardous chemical shipments through terminal gates without verified dangerous goods documentation. Every time Trevor issued these illegal directives, I blocked them in port track. As the designated license holder on file with the FMC and Customs and Border Protection, I was legally liable for any regulatory violations. A single fraudulent hazmat declaration could result in federal fines exceeding $50,000 per violation and the permanent revocation of my OTI license. The friction reached a boiling point during the third week of November. Trevor presented me with a revised drayage schedule for an upcoming shipment of 500 high-cube reefer containers carrying perishable pharmaceuticals valued at $40 million. He demanded that I override the safety lockouts in port track to allow uncertified third-party owner-operators to haul the freight. We save 18% on carrier costs by using non-contract drivers, Vance, Trevor declared during a morning executive meeting, leaning back in his leather chair. Stop being a dinosaur, override the system. Those drivers don't carry the requisite TWIC credentials or hazardous material endorsements, Trevor, I replied calmly. If Customs pulls those trucks for a tailgate inspection at the gate, the port will seize the containers, hit us with liquidated damages, and flag Apex for a full audit. I will not authorize it. Trevor's eyes narrowed. You work for me, Vance. You will do what I tell you, or I will find someone who will. I work for Apex, Trevor, I said quietly, and as long as my name is on the FMC license, the rules of federal maritime law apply in this building. Trevor didn't argue further that morning, but I knew the corporate machine was turning. Over the next 48 hours, Trevor quietly met with corporate legal and HR to prepare my termination paperwork, operating under the naive assumption that port track and the ocean freight licenses belonged to Apex outright. He had never bothered to read the foundational corporate contracts from 2004. He saw a 52-year-old veteran standing in the way of his private equity payout, and he decided to crush me. The confrontation came on Friday morning at precisely 8:30. I had just arrived at my desk with a fresh cup of black coffee when my phone buzzed with an urgent calendar invite from HR. Emergency Operational Alignment Meeting, Executive Boardroom. When I walked into the boardroom, Trevor was seated at the head of the long table, flanked by HR Director Sandra Miller and two stern-faced men in dark suits wearing private security badges. On the table lay a manila folder marked with my name. Sit down, Vance, Trevor said without looking up from his tablet. I remained standing, keeping my hands resting comfortably in my pockets. I prefer to stand, Trevor. What is this about? Trevor clicked his pen and leaned forward, adopting an air of cold authority. Over the past 6 months, your repeated refusal to implement executive directive has severely compromised company growth. You have created an atmosphere of insubordination, undermined my authority in front of staff, and deliberately stalled key carrier cost reduction initiatives. As Chief Executive Officer, I have determined that your continued presence is detrimental to Apex Intermodal. Sandra Miller slid a 2-page document across the table toward me. Effective immediately, Vance, your employment with Apex Intermodal is terminated for cause due to gross insubordination and failure to perform executive duties. I picked up the document and scanned it. The language was aggressive and calculated. By classifying the firing as for cause, Trevor was attempting to void my contractual 12-month severance pay of $240,000, as well as forfeit my accrued equity performance bonus of $420,000. a total of $660,000 legally earned over years of service. Attached to the termination notice was a comprehensive general release waiver. In exchange for a paltry 2-week payout of $9,200, the contract stipulated that I surrender all intellectual property, waive all rights to future claims, and grant Apex unlimited rights to all proprietary software and regulatory filings associated with my name. A slight smile touched the corner of my mouth. For cause, Trevor, I saved this company from 3 federal hazmat citations this month alone. You hindered operational velocity, Trevor snapped, slapping his hand on the table. You don't get to lecture me on how to run my father's business. You're 52 years old, Vance. Your outdated methods are anchor weights on this company's valuation. We are modernizing. And what about my accrued equity bonus and contractual severance? I asked calmly. Forfeited, Trevor declared smugly. Read the clause for cause terminations. You get 2 weeks' pay if you sign that release right now. If you don't, you leave with nothing, and our legal team will tie you up in court until your savings are depleted. The 2 security guards took a step forward, attempting an intimidation tactic that might have worked on a junior clerk, but was utterly meaningless to someone who had negotiated birthrights with international shipping cartels for 22 years. I picked up a pen from the table. I checked the line on the termination acknowledgement form, the standard document acknowledging receipt of notice, and signed my name clearly. Then, I picked up the general release waiver, folded it neatly in half, and handed it back to Sandra Miller. I acknowledge receipt of the termination notice, I said evenly. I reject the release agreement. Trevor snorted softly. Suit yourself. Security will escort you to your office to pack your personal belongings. You have 10 minutes to clear out. Your access credentials to our servers have already been revoked. Understood, I replied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't threaten. I simply turned and walked out of the boardroom, back in my corner office overlooking the port container cranes. I spent 5 minutes packing my personal items into a small cardboard box. A framed photograph of George Vance and me standing in front of Apex's first terminal crane in 2004, my brass harbor clock, and a favorite ceramic coffee mug. I didn't need to steal data or download proprietary files. Everything I needed was already registered under Miller Logistics Tech LLC at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and the Federal Maritime Commission. While packing, I watched Julian, Trevor's 28-year-old operational assistant, hurry into the central dispatch floor. Julian was a bright kid with a degree in data analytics, but he had never stepped foot on a container vessel or spoken to a port terminal director in his life. Trevor had appointed him interim director of logistics, handing him the master administrative login to Apex's internal network. At 9:15 a.m., flanked by the 2 security guards, I walked through the glass lobby of Apex Intermodal for the last time. As the automated sliding doors closed behind me, I stepped into my truck, placed the box in the passenger seat, and dialed my longtime legal counsel, Nathan Croft. Nathan was a 56-year-old veteran maritime attorney who had drafted Apex's original corporate filings with me 22 years ago. He answered in the second ring. Vance, what's going on? Nathan asked. Trevor just fired me. Nathan, I said, starting the engine. Effective immediately. Terminated for cause, 0 severance, 0 performance bonus payout. There was a long silence on the line, followed by the heavy sigh of an attorney who realized the sheer magnitude of the mistake the opposite party had just committed. Did Trevor sign the termination paper himself? He signed it. Sandra Miller signed it, and I have a physical copy in my hand, I replied. He has no idea what he just triggered, does he? Nathan asked quietly. None whatsoever, I said. He thinks PortTrack is company property, and he believes our FMC OTI license is registered directly to Apex's corporate tax ID, under Clause 14B of your 2004 Operating Agreement and License Covenant, Nathan stated, his tone shifting into crisp legal precision. Your termination without cause, or an illegal breach of severance provisions, automatically revokes Apex's license to utilize PortTrack 4.0 and terminates their legal authority to operate under your personal FMC OTI license and bond number 019482. Correct, I said. Draft the formal revocation notices immediately. issue a formal written demand to Apex's board of directors for my $660,000 in severance and accrued equity bonuses. Simultaneously, transmit the mandatory ODI, license revocation notice to the Federal Maritime Commission Bureau of Certification, and send formal notice to the port authorities of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland that Apex Intermodal is no longer authorized to clearance ocean bills of lading under OTI Bond 019482. By federal law, the OTI revocation requires a 48-hour statutory notice period, Nathan noted. That means as of Sunday morning at 9:15 a.m., every container tied to Apex's OTI number will be automatically flagged by Customs and Border Protection. Precisely, I said. Give Trevor his 48 hours. Let him celebrate his cost-cutting victory over the weekend. I hung up the phone, put my truck in drive, and drove home to my quiet waterfront house in San Pedro. Phase 1 was complete. Trevor had stepped right into the snare he had spent 6 months weaving. Friday afternoon in the shipping industry is usually a mad scramble to clear port gates before the weekend terminal closures. But for me, it was a time of methodical execution. Sitting in my home office overlooking the harbor, I opened my personal laptop and logged into the administrative portal of Miller Logistics Tech, LLC. On my screen sat the primary API licensing server for PortTrack 4.0, hosted on a secure AWS S3 cluster under my sole personal identity. Every 3 minutes, Apex's corporate servers sent an encrypted handshaking token to my AWS server to validate their operational license key. If the token handshake succeeded, PortTrack processed container manifests, cleared customs entries, and executed drayage routing without interruption. If the handshake failed or was revoked, the software automatically dropped into audit mode. A read-only state that froze all automated data exchanges, prevented container release requests, and locked the routing algorithms. I opened the account management console for Apex Intermodal Logistics. Beneath the license status banner, I entered the digital execution command, scheduling the license token revocation for Sunday morning at precisely 9 o'clock, matching the exact 48-hour statutory period triggered by my termination notice. Next, I dialed Nathan Croft to confirm the regulatory filings. The paperwork is fully served, Vance, Nathan confirmed, his paper files rustling in the background. At 1:15 p.m. today, a certified process server delivered formal legal notices to Sandra Miller at Apex HR and copied every member of Apex's board of directors, including Chairman George Vance. Simultaneously, we submitted the formal license revocation affidavit to the Federal Maritime Commission's Bureau of Certification in Washington, D.C., under 46 CFR 515-16. Did you notify U.S. Customs and Border Protection? I asked. Hand-delivered to the port director at the L.A. Long Beach Seaport Security Division, Nathan replied smoothly. Customs has updated their automated commercial environment system. As of Sunday morning, OTI bond number 019482 is officially flagged as unassigned due to the departure of the license qualifying individual. Any bill of lading tendered under that OTI bond will trigger an automatic port hold. To understand the brutal reality of international logistics, one must understand how paper manifest data translates into physical steel containers moving through a port. When a mega container ship carrying 20,000 containers docks at the Port of Los Angeles, it relies on automated electronic data interchange, specifically EDI 301 container status messages and EDI 315 gate event updates. When an ocean carrier like Maersk or MSC receives an electronic release request from a freight forwarder, their automated systems query 2 things. First, is the freight forwarder's FMC OTI license active and bonded? Second, has the customs broker submitted and cleared entry summary through an authorized EDI system? If both conditions are met, the port's automated terminal operating system generates a 4-digit terminal PIN code, allowing a drayage truck to enter the gate, pick up the container, and haul it away. If either condition fails, the container stays on the terminal deck, and once a container sits on a terminal deck past its free time allowance, usually 48 hours, demurrage penalties kick in. At the Port of Los Angeles, demurrage starts at $250 per container per day, escalates to $500 per day after 48 hours, and compounds exponentially. Apex currently had 1,400 containers in transit. 500 high-cube reefer containers of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals floating on 3 ocean vessels anchored in San Pedro Bay, 400 containers of retail electronics sitting on the terminal docks awaiting customs release, and 500 intermodal rail containers staged at the inland rail yards in Colton and San Bernardino. Without my OTI license, Apex could not legally clearance a single ocean bill of lading. Without PortTrack 4.0, Apex had no way to generate automated gate appointments or communicate with carrier dispatch systems. While I spent Saturday afternoon walking along the coastal cliffs of Palos Verdes, Trevor Vance was celebrating. Through mutual contacts in the freight industry, I learned that Trevor had hosted a lavish dinner on Saturday evening at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Los Angeles for the managing partners of Sterling Capital Partners. He boasted to the private equity team that he had successfully streamlined management, eliminated $660,000 in redundant executive compensation, and boosted quarterly EBITDA projections by 14%, all positioning Apex for a frictionless $300 million buyout in the first quarter of 2026. Trevor was so blinded by his financial hubris that he ignored the formal legal letters delivered to his office on Friday afternoon. Sandra Miller had placed the legal envelope on Trevor's desk, but Trevor, assuming it was merely standard post-termination, posturing from an angry ex-employee, hadn't even broken the seal. On Sunday morning at 9:15 a.m., the 48-hour statutory clock ran out. High above the Pacific Ocean, on the AWS cloud servers in Oregon, the PortTrack licensing engine executed its scheduled script. The license status for Apex Intermodal instantly flipped from active to revoked. Across Apex's corporate headquarters, dispatch monitors froze. The automated data streams connecting Apex to the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, and Customs and Border Protection severed instantly. Simultaneously, the Federal Maritime Commission's Central Registry updated its public database, marking Apex Intermodal's ocean freight authorization as suspended. No qualifying individual on file. In the silent, empty offices of Apex Intermodal, on Sunday morning, automated error alerts began flooding the server logs. But because Trevor had given the IT team the weekend off to save on overtime pay, no one saw the red warning lights blinking across the dispatch monitors. The multi-million-dollar trap was sprung. The supply chain juggernaut that I had built over 22 years had just turned into an unyielding concrete wall. And on Monday morning at 6 o'clock, when the first shift of 500 drayage trucks arrived at the port gates to haul Apex's freight, Trevor Vance was going to hit that wall at full speed. Monday morning, 6 o'clock a.m. The sun was just rising over the industrial silhouette of the Port of Los Angeles as the morning shift of drayage trucks rolled up to the automated entry lanes at APM Terminals Pier 400 and Phoenix Marine Services. The first Apex contracted truck pulled up to the optical character recognition scanner. The driver inserted his TWIC card into the kiosk and typed in his container release number. A loud yellow strobe light flashed atop the kiosk, and the digital display screen flashed a bold red error message, *Error 403. OTI Versuchen suspended dented by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The automated hydraulic gate arm remained firmly down. Behind that first truck, a line of 50 heavy diesel rigs began backing up onto the harbor freeway, horns blaring in frustration. Within 90 minutes, the scene played out across every container terminal in Southern California. 400 container pickups scheduled for Monday morning were abruptly rejected. Ocean carriers Maersk, MSC, and Costco immediately flagged Apex's master accounts, placing automated credit holds on all inbound freight. In the Bay, 3 massive container vessels carrying Apex's pharmaceutical reefer units were denied berth clearance by port authorities because the customs paperwork lacked a valid bonded OTI license holder. Demurrage charges began ticking like an atomic clock. 1,400 containers, times $250 per container, meant Apex was accumulating $350,000 in daily port penalties, escalating to $700,000 per day after 48 hours. At 8 o'clock a.m., Trevor Vance strolled into Apex corporate headquarters holding a venti latte, expecting a quiet morning celebrating his cost reduction metrics. Instead, he stepped into a war zone. The dispatch floor was in absolute chaos. 40 telephone lines were ringing continuously. Dispatchers were screaming into headsets, frantically trying to explain to furious corporate clients why their freight was trapped at the port. "What is going on here?" Trevor barked, walking onto the floor. "Why isn't dispatch running?" Julian, Trevor's newly appointed 28-year-old director of logistics, ran out of his office, his face pale and sweating profusely. "Trevor, the entire system is down. PortTrack isn't processing any gate clearances, and the port terminals just rejected all 400 of our morning drayage dispatches." "Then restart the server," Trevor shouted. "Log into PortTrack and manually push the releases." Julian pointed with a trembling hand toward the master monitor on the dispatch wall. Displayed across the 40-foot screen in bold crimson lettering was a single system notification. "System access denied. Fourth license revoked by Miller Logistics Tech LC. PortTrack 4.0 is operating in read-only audit mode. Tainting inquiries, contact legal@millerlogisticsstuff.com." Trevor stared at the screen, his face flushing deep red. "What is this nonsense? Override it. Get it up here right now." 10 minutes later, Apex's director of information technology stood in Trevor's glass office. "We can't override it, Trevor," the IT director explained flatly. "PortTrack doesn't run on our local servers. It's a cloud-based SaaS platform owned entirely by Vance Miller's private LLC. He revoked our API authentication key on Sunday morning." "That's illegal. He stole our software," Trevor screamed. "He didn't steal anything," the IT director replied, pulling up a copy of the 2004 licensing contract. "Vance owns the patent and copyright. Apex has been leasing it for $1 a year under a conditional license tied to his employment. When you fired him on Friday, the license automatically terminated after 48 hours. Before Trevor could digest that blow, Sandra Miller burst into the office holding a stack of urgent legal faxes. "Trevor, we have an emergency. U.S. Customs just issued a formal cease and desist order. All ocean freight forwarding is halted immediately because our FMC OTI license was registered under Vance's personal bond. Since he's no longer employed, Apex is operating without a federal ocean transportation license." Trevor dropped into his chair, his hands shaking. His phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of the vice president of global logistics for Pfizer, their largest client, whose $40 million pharmaceutical shipment was currently sitting unrefrigerated on Pier 400. Trevor answered with a strained voice. "Hello, Marcus." "Trevor, what the hell is going on at the port?" The client roared through the speaker. "Our carrier just informed us that 500 of our cold chain reefer containers are stranded because your company lacks a valid customs license. If those temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals spoil due to container power loss, Pfizer will sue Apex for $50 million and file criminal fraud charges against you personally." Trevor hung up the phone, cold sweat drenching his shirt collar. He grabbed his cell phone and dialed my personal number. I was sitting on my patio, sipping morning tea while watching cargo ships navigate the harbor channel, when my phone screen lit up with Trevor's name. I let it ring. It went straight to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text message popped up. "Vance, call me immediately. The system is having a glitch. We need you to come in and fix PortTrack right now. We can discuss your severance." I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, Trevor called again. I let it go to voicemail. By 10 o'clock a.m., Trevor sent an official email threatening me with criminal sabotage and immediate lawsuits. My attorney, Nathan Croft, instantly sent a formal reply to Trevor, copying Apex's entire board of directors. "Dear Mr. Vance, your claims of sabotage are legally frivolous. My client, Vance Miller, was terminated by you for cause on Friday, November 21st. Pursuant to Section 14B of the 2004 Operating Agreement, your unilateral termination of Mr. Miller automatically revoked Apex's permissive license to utilize PortTrack 4.0 and terminated Apex's authority to operate under Mr. Miller's personal FMC OTI license 019482. Apex is currently operating in direct violation of federal maritime law. My client owes zero duties to an entity that breached his employment agreement and refused to pay his earned equity performance bonuses. Any further harassing communications will be referred to federal law enforcement." 30 minutes after Nathan's email was delivered, the ultimate bomb dropped on Trevor. George Vance, founder of Apex, chairman of the board, and Trevor's father, arrived at corporate headquarters in a wheelchair driven by his executive assistant. George had been notified by the board of directors after receiving Nathan's legal notice. George slammed his cane against Trevor's desk, his face thunderous with rage. "You arrogant fool," George bellowed, his voice echoing across the executive floor. "You fired Vance Miller? The man who built this company's entire infrastructure. You didn't even read the foundational legal deeds. Dad, he was resisting my cost-cutting measures." Trevor stammered, backing away. "I was trying to optimize EBITDA for the Sterling Capital buyout." "Sterling Capital called me 10 minutes ago," George roared. "They just pulled out of the buyout deal entirely. They won't touch a company facing $50 million in client lawsuits, federal customs audits, and daily port demurrage of $350,000. You've ruined us in 72 hours. George turned to his assistant. "Call an emergency board of directors meeting for 2:00 p.m. and get Nathan Croft on the phone. We are going to fix this before my son destroys my life's work." At 2:15 p.m. on Monday afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Trevor. It was George Vance calling directly from the executive boardroom. "Vance, it's George," the old man said, his voice trembling with emotion and exhaustion. "I am so deeply sorry. My son acted out of gross arrogance, ignorance, and greed. He had no authority to treat you the way he did, and he understood nothing about what it takes to run this company." "I appreciate the call, George," I replied calmly. "I hold no malice towards you or Apex. But Trevor made choices, and those choices have legal and operational consequences. The board of directors just voted unanimously 10 minutes ago," George stated firmly. "Trevor has been relieved of all executive duties and terminated for gross negligence. We are referring his unauthorized alterations of customs manifests to our outside audit firm. But Vance, we are facing total ruin. Customs has locked our freight, Pfizer is preparing a lawsuit, and demurrage is eating us alive. What will it take to bring you back and unfreeze this company?" I sat back in my chair, holding a pen over a blank notepad. I had spent the weekend calculating my exact terms with Nathan Croft. I was not going to step back into a toxic corporate environment as an employee, but I would solve their crisis as a sovereign owner of critical logistics infrastructure. "Here are my non-negotiable terms, George," I said, speaking with absolute clarity. "First, Apex will immediately wire transfer the full $420,000 in accrued equity performance bonuses owed to me, along with my 24-month contractual severance payout of $240,000, totaling $660,000 in earned compensation." "Agreed," George said without hesitation. "What else?" "Second, Miller Logistics Tech's LLCs will sell a permanent, non-exclusive enterprise license of PortTrack 4.0 to Apex Intermodal for a lump sum buyout fee of $1,500,000. I retain all underlying source code ownership and patent rights." "Agreed," George responded. "And the FMC OTI license. Third, I will not rejoin Apex as an employee," I continued. "However, I will establish a 2-year independent logistics advisory agreement between Miller Logistics Tech LLC and Apex at a fixed retainer of $300,000 per year, payable quarterly in advance. Under this agreement, I will re-register OTI Bond 019482 under a corporate co-management trust for Apex's exclusive use, provided I retain absolute veto power over all federal customs compliance filings. And fourth," I added, "Trevor Vance will have zero access to corporate premises, zero communication with dispatch staff, and his equity shares will be clawed back into the corporate treasury to offset the demurrage losses his negligence incurred." "Done," George said immediately. "Our corporate legal team is drafting the settlement agreement right now. As soon as you and Nathan sign, the wire transfer of $2,160,000 will be executed." At 4:10 p.m., Nathan Croft confirmed that the $2,160,000 wire transfer had officially cleared and posted into Miller Logistics Tech LLC's corporate bank account. At 4:15 p.m., sitting at my desk in San Pedro, I opened the AWS Management Console. With 3 keystrokes, I re-enabled the API licensing tokens for PortTrack 4.0 and transmitted the updated OTI authorization files to US. Customs and Border Protection's automated commercial environment system. Within 4 minutes, the red warning banners on Apex's dispatch monitors disappeared. Port tracks surged back to life, processing 400 queued container release requests per minute. Electronic release codes flashed green across the terminal gates at the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach. Outside Pier 400, the long line of drayage trucks began rolling through the gates once again. The stranded pharmaceutical reefers were cleared for immediate transport, avoiding tens of millions of dollars in product spoilage. At 4:45 p.m., as I watched the live terminal webcam feeds from my patio, I saw a lone figure walking out of Apex corporate headquarters carrying a small cardboard box. It was Trevor Vance, stripped of his executive title, denied his private equity buyout, and facing potential regulatory scrutiny for manifest tampering. Trevor walked across the parking lot alone. The security guards who had escorted me out 3 days earlier were now watching Trevor step into his car and drive away from the company he had nearly destroyed. In the end, Trevor's attempt to cut costs by firing a 52-year-old veteran cost Apex over $2.1 million in direct settlement payouts, hundreds of thousands in port demurrage fees, and ruined his own standing in the corporate world forever. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the cool ocean breeze coming off the harbor. I was no longer an employee taking orders from arrogant executives who didn't understand the ground truth of their own business. I was a sovereign consultant, earning $300,000 a year on my own terms, owning the intellectual property that kept the port moving, and holding the keys to the entire supply chain empire. The shipping lanes were clear, the containers were moving, and the ledger was finally balanced.